Good morning, Life Point Crossing, once again. Hope you're doing well today. Glad you're here. This is the dramatic conclusion of this series on questions that Jesus asked. Next week, we'll be starting something brand new that is honestly more challenging for me than I thought it would be, and different, Anyway, we'll see how it goes, but I think it'll really be valuable. So you see God and the world in probably some brand new ways. But here we are for today, talking about questions that Jesus asked. And of course, every question that Jesus asked does not have a direct link to you and me today. But this one really does, which of course is part of why we're talking about it. So if you have spent a lot of time in church or studying the Bible, you will probably be familiar with the situation. It's pretty well known and talked about a lot. What has just happened immediately before this picks up was Jesus feeding 5,000 people miraculously, amazing thing. And so then what happens is he sends the disciples on a boat across the Sea of Galilee while he stays back to pray. And we're not told exactly what the meetup plan was exactly, but Jesus prays for a very long time. It's night, and then we pick up with the disciples in Matthew 14, where meanwhile they were in trouble far away from the land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. I don't know how that looks or sounds to you. This is on the Sea of Galilee. This is 13 miles long by 8 miles wide. That is about 3 times the size of the city of Blue Springs, almost the size of the city of Independence. This is not Lake Tapawingo. And just some geographical features so happened that they had crazy weather things happen. And so this is something that would happen from time to time. And so here it is. Well, about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them. How did Jesus come toward them? Walking on the water. Now, if I was there in the boat, I don't know what I would have thought about that. If you were there, I don't know what you would have thought about that. But we do happen to know precisely what the disciples thought about that. They saw him walking on the water. They were terrified. And in their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." Probably because I wasn't there, but I mean, this is funny to me. Could you imagine, right? You're there, you're the disciples, you've been with Jesus, but right now you're not. So here you are in the middle of this huge body of water, terrifying, fighting for your life. And normally you have with you a legitimate miracle worker who can do anything, except he stayed back to pray. And now when things couldn't get any worse, here comes a ghost walking on at least they think, and again, it's probably not funny if you're there, but I just think that's very, very funny, because if you know me, I think things are funny. Well, Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I'm here." And a whole nother message for a whole nother day, but this really is amazing to me how when Jesus says this, nothing actually changes in the situation. The circumstance is the exact same, except now everything in the situation is different. If you've been reading through Matthew, which, we haven't been going through Matthew, but if you just happen to come to Matthew 14, all the way back in Matthew 8, there was a kind of similar situation where they were all there, including Jesus, in a boat on the same Sea of Galilee. Similar huge storm comes up, terrifying, and Jesus is there, except he's taking a nappy nap, and so they go wake him up. He tells the storm to cut it out, and it obeys. So that's already happened. They've already seen that. And so now, they were terrified because there was a storm and no Jesus, but maybe a ghost. Now, the storm is still there, but so is Jesus. So, okay, this is going to be all right. Not really a problem. Perfect. And what happens next, I don't know. Peter called to him. Peter and I are not the same. He said, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." Honestly, that is just super strange to me. Why would anybody think that this is the thing to do or the thing to say? I do not know. Peter is always known for being a little more impulsive than thought out and rational, but this is what he says. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what I think. You shouldn't care what I think either because we know what Jesus thinks about this, and that's ultimately important. Jesus is good with it. He says, yes, come, Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. No wonder this got written down. Jesus walking on the water, that's obviously remarkable. But if you've been reading through Matthew, by this time, you've seen him do many, many miraculous supernatural things, or really, since the beginning of time, if you want to talk about that. But this isn't Jesus, this is Peter, regular human being, just like you or me, walking on the water. This is different. This is a whole different sort of level of remarkable. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified, began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Well, Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. And then here's the question. Why did you doubt me? Now, when I was putting together a series about questions Jesus asked, this stuck out pretty easily as like, okay, this is good. This will really relate. This can be a really good message. We can talk about this. But then when I came to actually put the message together, the more I looked at this, I just had more questions and more questions, because does it seem like Peter had really pretty amazing faith? Literally, all he needed to know is that it was really Jesus and that he told them to come, and he got out of the stinking boat. The lake is, on average, 84 feet deep. At its deepest part, 150 feet. There are waves coming up. Like, this is a legitimately life or death situation. And so he decides he's going to walk across the water that is actively trying to kill him. That is amazing. You know where I would have been if I was there? Where were the other 11 disciples? Still in the boat. That's what I bet you I would have been still in the boat. So at this point, I'm pretty impressed. But it is a terrifying situation. And so he starts to doubt, apparently, a little bit, and he starts to sink. Then what does he do? If you go back, here's what he did. He shouted, "Save me, Lord." If I'm preaching this, I'm going to say that is the exact right, faith-filled thing to do and say. Save me, Lord. 2 thumbs up from me. If I was exactly me with my same background in history and education and decades of following Jesus, except I had just never come upon this particular event before, and I was reading it through with fresh eyes for the first time, I would expect, honestly, legitimately, I would expect Jesus to say something really encouraging, and that this would go down as an amazing evidence of both Jesus' supernatural nature and healing power, as well as Peter's really pretty amazing faith. That's really, honestly, what I would expect. But instead, he gets, "You have so little faith. Why did you doubt me?" Man, he got out of the boat. And in fact, what happens next, if you go to continue reading, is he and Jesus, you know what they do? They get back into the boat. And then the wind stops, but you know what happens next is, well, it's not that the 13 of them then all get out and walk the rest of the way across the water to the other shore, hand in hand like Vegas showgirls or something. They stay in the boat. All of them, including Jesus. And so, this is pretty interesting to me. So, we'll get to you and me in a moment, but if it helps, something that I came across when I was studying for this was maybe it makes more sense if we do consider it along with the previous event and sort of can see them a little bit together. I won't go into detail, but a part of what happened with, you may know it, is the feeding of the 5,000, is Jesus is teaching, there's thousands of people, and so the disciples tell Jesus, you got to send them home so they can get dinner. But Jesus says, no, it's okay, you guys go feed them. And he said, we have almost no food. He said, oh, it's okay, just start serving. And so they do, and of course everybody eats and they have more left over than they started with. Pretty amazing, obviously. But something that's interesting about that is there's this situation that, of course, looks absolutely impossible, but Jesus has them do it, or at least do the legwork. And so there's a situation that looked impossible. Jesus uses them to do what is impossible. Now this is less than 12 hours later. This is that same night, 3 in the morning, whatever. And now maybe, I don't know, but maybe here's Peter, and he's thinking about what he just saw Jesus do and use him in where they didn't have any reason to, or if they had reason, they didn't have any belief that that was going to happen, that Jesus was going to use them to do that impossible thing. And now, with that fresh in mind, maybe he sees Jesus doing something that looks impossible, and he says, okay, well, I didn't have any faith before, but now I'm going to have some faith, and I'm going to do it, and he gets kind of halfway. So it's not all the way, but maybe it's progress. It's not, Peter, you don't have any faith. Peter, you have some faith, but it's not really what it could be. It's not going to be what it will need to be. I don't know, maybe that helps. And then it doesn't answer the question, though, of what, Peter, why did you doubt? And if Peter has an answer, it doesn't tell us what it is. Ultimately, I don't know that it matters so much as what really might matter is if we ask ourselves the question that Jesus asked to Peter, why do you doubt? And the question really presupposes that whatever your answer is, it's not a good answer. But I do think that said, there can be some value in thinking about maybe what our answers might be and considering that. And in fact, I think that it's possible one of the more common answers might be that very honestly and very genuinely, very innocently, man, sometimes we just kind of get maybe some of what is or isn't intended to be a takeaway from these events a little bit kind of mixed up within ourselves, right? Because if you're going to preach or teach from this story and maybe focus more on just the bigger story, less the specific question that Jesus asked, what's really the takeaway? Well, have faith in Jesus, he can do it. Pretty simple, pretty clear, pretty easy, right? Sure. Okay. But what's it? Doesn't matter. Jesus can do what looks impossible. Kind of. Jesus can do what looks impossible? Absolutely. Absolutely, no question, unequivocally. But doesn't matter? I don't know. Maybe. One thing that you do see Peter do is he makes doubly sure that, number one, this is Jesus, and that Jesus is specifically asking him to come out and walk on the water. But I know, I've been around this for a lot of years now, it's so sometimes wonderful to hear a super inspiring message about, you know what, whatever your boat is, Jesus is calling you to have faith in him, to do the impossible, and get out of your boat. And so you're like, okay, Jesus wants me out of my boat. What's my boat? Well, I'm in this marriage. Maybe that's my boat. Jesus calling me to get out of the marriage. And of course, that's just sort of the easy classic example, because every pastor who's ever pastored has had someone come and say, Pastor, I really feel like God's asking me to leave my wife to go be with my secretary, who, by the way, every single time is a few years younger, a little more attractive, doesn't really have opinions of her own, just goes with whatever you say. Never, ever, ever is the secretary a few years older, a little frumpy, kind of looks like a buffalo. Super opinionated, but just a really godly prayer warrior woman who wouldn't have been flirting with you in the first place. So yeah, that's not a boat. Jesus isn't calling you to get out of that. What Jesus did say specifically about marriage is what God has joined together, don't separate. Okay, it's the easy example. Much more difficult is, what if it's something that maybe is morally neutral or even really positive and good and godly? When we were in New Hampshire, really shortly after we moved to New Hampshire, another couple moved he came from Illinois, actually, a guy named Nathan, who had specifically moved there because he specifically believed that God had specifically called him to plant a church in a specific place, a specific town, Dover, New Hampshire. After several years, I don't remember exactly how long because it wasn't my life, but we were friends, and we talked regularly, had lunch, we were friends. After several years, he decided that no longer could he justify renting a space and doing everything that it takes to have a church to just have a church for his family. So he shut down. If you're here and you hear that and you're like, well, he just needed to have more faith. He just needed to stick with it. Listen, Jesus is the only one who has the right to say that. Man, he moved all by himself with he and his wife. No denominational support, no sending agency, no nothing, not knowing a person to the most difficult ministry place in the country. That's way out of your boat. And maybe, I'm open to this, maybe he did exactly what God had brought him there to do. I think that is possible. I absolutely do. That's not lip service. That could be. I also believe that God would have used his servant if he would have stayed in Illinois. Is it possible that maybe just God didn't specifically call him to go plant a church in that specific town? Honestly, that's really kind of where I lean. I could be wrong. That's not just like trying to say that. Like I could be wrong. I do not know the mind of God. I don't see the spiritual invisible realm. I could be wrong, but that's if you ask me what I think, that's really kind of what I think. Now, it wasn't a bad or wrong thing to do. Oh my goodness, it was a great thing to do. It was completely God-honoring, faith-filled thing from a man who loved God deeply and was giving his life to serve him. And I absolutely don't want to throw water on anybody's faith or taking faith-filled risks for Jesus. Honestly, I want more of that for myself. And if you believe that God is calling you to do something, you really probably should do it. If that is really your conviction, I don't know, you should do it. And I don't know, I never asked him if he was glad or sorry that he went, but I'm glad he went because I think I would much, much rather live with, I don't know, but we did it and that's what happened than, man, I really thought God wanted me to fill in the blank, but I didn't, and so now I'm never going to know. And, don't live with that regret. But also don't hold God responsible when something that he never said to do, it kind of blows up. And if we do that, then, yeah, it's going to be really easy to doubt the next time, isn't it? When it is clear, let's just acknowledge that sometimes faith is really difficult. Oh, you guys, as soon as one crisis is past, as soon as one miracle is past, is it not so easy to just forget about that? You put that behind you, and now whatever the next thing is looks really scary. Maybe you have seen God work 1,000 times. You know you have. But when you're waiting on time 1001, yeah, maybe those just kind of fade away, and you just kind of forget. If you ever read through the Old Testament or spend a lot of time in the Old Testament, something that I think you'll see time after time after time, especially in the historical books in the Psalms, is they continually go back to remember the things that God has done. Specifically, what you see over and over is remembering God bringing the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt through the wilderness and into the promised land. Over and over and over again. Because remembering what God has done helps us have faith in what God will do. Here we are now in the New Testament. We have now actually seen literal Jesus come and live and die and resurrect. Why do we keep talking about that? Well, number one, it's the most important thing that happened in the history of the world. Number two, that means that God is exactly who he says he is, that God created you, that God loves you, that Jesus died so you could be adopted and forgiven as a child of God, and he can do anything and everything. maybe it's easy to read through Matthew 14 and you say, Peter, you just saw Jesus feed 5,000 people miraculously. How could you doubt? I would have had so much more faith than you. And you know what? We're not there with literal Jesus in real time like they were. But also, we live after the death and resurrection. That had not yet happened during this event. How can we doubt the one who we have seen live, die, and resurrect? Oh, my goodness, I know it's easy to do, but remember what God has done will help us to have faith in what God will do. And maybe that's it. Maybe you're just not sure about what maybe God has done. You just maybe haven't really seen enough to be convinced of that. I optimistically in faith say, yet. And if that's you, I'm glad you're here. I can very much understand how it would be difficult to have faith if you are not convinced of, for instance, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But will you look and give it some real consideration? Why would anybody believe that? Actually, it's a reasonably good question. What kind of evidence would you hope for, or would you reasonably expect, or think there could be or should be? What would be a reasonable threshold to see before it would really start to make sense to believe and put your faith in something like this? And then, look, you guys, I would not believe just based on coming to a church. I would not believe just based on some words that are written in a book. I would ask a lot of questions about those words. How did they get there? And why? And when I did, I found way better answers than I was expecting. I wonder if you might too. But will you please really give it some consideration and really have a look? And then let's end this on a high note, because guys, it's hard to tell how unhappy Jesus really might have been. You can't really read tone into it. I don't know. I think it's possible. I don't know. Maybe Jesus was a little bit playful, right? Peter, you have so little faith. Why do you doubt me? I don't know. Maybe he had some real human frustration. Peter, you have so little faith. Why do you doubt me? I don't know. But we do know how the story ends. Not in getting across the lake, but how it ends for Peter. And here he is in this moment where you can see that clearly he has some faith. He got out of the boat. And he also had some doubt. He started to sink. Does that sound like anybody you know? Does that sound like probably most of us? Like, I believe. Like, I do believe. But sometimes, well, you guys, for starters, hey, save me, Lord, was enough. Hey, at least in that moment, right? At least to have him, it doesn't mean his soul was saved, but Jesus literally reached out, grabbed him, pulled him up. What he needed was not perfect faith. What he needed was faith in the right place. Okay? And specifically, that place is the person of Jesus Christ. And then Peter, starting at that moment, right? Do most of us agree right about where we are with some combination of faith and doubt? Where does he end up? As, along with the Apostle Paul, one of the two chief spearheads in the early movement of following Jesus, arguably, very, very realistically, arguably, the human being who did the most for the cause of Christ in the history of the world. He wrote books of the Bible. Come on. So why did Peter doubt? I don't know. I don't really know that it matters. But I know that most of us do have a tendency to doubt from time to time. I mean, are you a human being who maybe you've been following Jesus for decades? You've seen a lot, but I don't know, maybe sometimes you still, I don't know, I'm facing this thing and I don't know how it's going to turn out. Listen, I've seen many, many remarkable answers to prayer. I don't really know how things are going to turn out either. But here's what to have confidence in and not doubt. God loves you. God created you. Jesus died so you could be forgiven and adopted as a child in his family. And one of the great parts of that is that really it depends on him and not you. Save me, Lord, does not necessarily mean that you won't drown if you jump out of a boat in the middle of a lake. I mean, for 2,000 years, followers of Jesus have been dying. We're all either Jesus is going to come back or we're all going to die of something one way or the other anyway. But what's certain is what's clear. God created you. God loves you. Jesus died and resurrected so that you could be adopted as a child of God and forgiven. I don't know if Jesus is telling you to jump out of whatever metaphorical boat you think you're in. I don't know. But I do know that he is absolutely asking you to come to him. Will you do it today? And we will do that in a particularly physical way right now. If you may have noticed, but we have the communion set up, and the way we do this here is the only requirement for taking part in communion is you're a follower of Jesus. You've given him your life, you have called on him, and you have faith in him for your forgiveness and salvation. That's it. There's no other special anything. You don't have to have a class. You don't have to, if it's your first time, 5,000th time, doesn't matter. But in a moment here, I'll just take a step back, and any of you who would choose, come take from either side. It's the cup and the wafer together. Take them back with you to your seat, and then when everybody is back and seated again, we will eat and drink together.